Dear listeners, welcome to a cozy corner of old England, where the hedgerows whisper secrets and the tea is always strong. I'm delighted you've joined me for Murder in Buttercup Hollow, a tale spun in the timeless tradition of village mysteries. Picture the rolling green hills of St. Mary Mead in the 1950s, where beneath the thatched roofs and blooming cottage gardens, human hearts beat with quiet dramas. Our gentle sleuth, Miss Jane Marple, with her knitting needles ever at the ready and eyes sharp as a sparrow's, unravels a puzzle as neatly as a tangled skein of wool. Settle in with a cuppa and let the story unfold. It's sure to leave you with a satisfied sigh, and perhaps a newfound fondness for your neighbors. Now, turn up the volume, and away we go. Chapter 1. A Shadow Over the Hollow. In the gentle embrace of an English summer, where the sun lingered like a fond guest reluctant to depart, lay the village of St. Mary Mead, a tapestry of thatched roofs and winding lanes that seemed woven from the very dreams of pastoral poets. It was the year 1952, a time when the echoes of war had softened to a distant murmur, and the world turned its face once more toward the simple rhythms of hearth and harvest. Amid this idyll nestled Buttercup Hollow, a secluded dell on the village's outskirts, where the land dipped into a verdant cradle, ringed by ancient oaks whose branches arched like the fingers of benevolent giants. Here, the soil was kind to wildflowers, coaxing carpets of golden buttercups that danced in the breeze, their petals a cheerful defiance against the encroaching shadows of yew hedges and ivy-clad walls. Buttercup Hollow was no ordinary corner of St. Mary Mead. It was a pocket of genteel retreat, where the village's more affluent souls sought respite from the clamor of county life. Cottages of honeyed stone huddled along a single, serpentine lane, their gardens a profusion of hollyhocks and lavender that perfumed the air with promises of tranquility. At the hollow's heart stood floral ranks. It was to this haven that Miss Jane Marple had come for the season, borrowing a quaint cottage from her late cousin's widow, a Mrs. Simmons, who preferred the drier climes of Bournemouth. Miss Marple, that unassuming spinster of indeterminate years, though the village clock of gossip placed her well into her 70s, found Buttercup Hollow a balm to her inquisitive spirit. She was a lady of modest means and immodest perception, her days filled with the quiet pursuits that masked a mind as labyrinthine as the hedges of Hampton Court. Her silver hair was coiled in a neat chignon, secured by a lace cap that nodded with each measured step, and her figure, though slight, carried the dignity of one who had long observed the follies of mankind from the safest vantage. A comfortable armchair by the window. In her basket, she carried not only skeins of wool for her endless knitting, a shawl for the vicar's wife, perhaps, or mittens for the postman's twins, but also the sharper tools of her trade. A pair of spectacles for peering at the smallest inconsistencies, and an ear attuned to the unspoken cadences of human nature. Miss Marple had always maintained that people were much like the plants in a well-tended garden. Some bloomed boldly under the sun, others thrived in the shade of secrecy, and a few bore thorns that only revealed themselves in the harvest. St. Mary Mead, with its web of acquaintances and alliances, was her natural habitat, a place where scandals simmered like stew on a back hob, ready to be stirred by a knowing spoon. Buttercup Hollow, being a touch more insular, promised a fresh plot for her observations. She had arrived but a fortnight prior, her trunks unpacked with the help of Cherry, her sturdy maid-of-all-work, who now bustled in the cottage kitchen, muttering about the dampness that clung to the rafters like an unwelcome suitor. On this particular Tuesday, the 3rd of July, the morning unfolded with the languor of high summer. Miss Marple rose at her customary hour, just as the first light gilded the buttercups beyond her care. To Buttercup Hollow wound gently downhill, flanked by hedgerows alive with the trill of blackbirds and the occasional scurry of a vole vanishing into the undergrowth. Miss Marple leaned lightly on her umbrella, more prop than shield in fine weather, while Mrs. Ives, ever the enthusiast, gestured expansively at the passing scenery. "Do you see, Jane dear, how the buttercups have taken over the verges this year? A positive riot. It's as if the good Lord himself scattered gold coins for the fairies. And Hargrove Manor. Ah, there's a place that could tell tales to curdle your cream. The colonel, you know, was in the Buffs during the Great War. Won a medal at Ypres, or so they say. But peacetime has soured him, poor soul. He's taken to his roses like a miser to his strongbox. Sacked poor Mr. Potts the gardener not a week past. Over a single petal gone awry, imagine. And as for that niece of his, Evelyn Thorne, well, whispers abound. Miss Marple listened with the polite attentiveness of one who hears the rustle of leaves before the storm. Whispers, Arabella. They are the wind's way of carrying pollen. Necessary, but one must discern the flower from the weed. The colonel strikes me as a man of routines, unyielding as the oaks. Such men make poor husbands, but excellent subjects for study. Her voice was soft, laced with the faint burr of a West Country upbringing, and her eyes, blue and bird-bright behind her spectacles, missed nothing. Not the fresh hoofprints in the muddied verge, nor the lace curtain twitching at a cottage window as they passed. Mrs. Ives chuckled, a sound like muffled bells. Study indeed. You're incorrigible, Jane. But mind you, the hollow has its thorns. Major Bentley, that old campaigner with the monocle and the limp, is forever calling on the colonel. Debts from their army days, they say. And Mr. Larkins, the builder, with his bills as tall as his temper. Then there's Mrs. Grimshaw, the housekeeper. Loyal as a spaniel, but with teeth, mark my words. Drawn to the manor's facade. The front door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of shadow spilling out like ink from a tipped bottle. "Observe, Arabella," she murmured, tilting her head. "The door, ajar at this hour? The colonel is a creature of locked portals. I've heard he double bolts even against the milkman. And the conservatory, its side door gapes like a yawn. Unusual for one so vigilant." Mrs. Ives fanned herself with a lace-trimmed handkerchief, embroidered with violets that matched her hat. "Perhaps he's entertaining. Or maybe Potts has been at the weeding again. Man handles a spade like it's Excalibur. Shall we venture in? The colonel might offer tea. His blend is frightfully exotic, shipped from Darjeeling or some such." Before Miss Marple could demur, propriety, after all, dictated announcements via the bell. A cry rent the air, sharp as a shard of glass. It came from the manor's eastern flank, where the rose gardens met the wilder tangle of the hollow's edge. The ladies turned as one, skirts whispering against the gravel. And there, bursting from a gap in the yew hedge like a coltish apparition, came young Tommy Larkins. The postboy was no more than 16, gangly-limbed and freckled as a thrush's egg, his cap askew and uniform jacket flapping open to reveal a bicycle chain's oily smear on his shirt. His face, usually alight with the irrepressible grin of village youth, was drained to the pallor of skimmed milk, eyes wide with the terror of one who has glimpsed the abyss. "Miss Marple! Mrs. Ives!" Tommy gasped, skidding to a halt and clutching at the gatepost for support. His chest heaved, each breath a ragged plea. "It's the Colonel. Lord help us. He's in his study. Stiff as a board and cold as the grave. I was delivering the post. Usual round, nothing queer. And the door was open, so I called out and there he was. Dr. Thorne's inside now, but it's no use, ma'am." A pair of secateurs abandoned on a bench, their blades still dewy with sap. A discarded glove, kid leather stained with soil, half buried in the mulch. And, curiously, a single buttercup, uprooted and trampled, its golden head crushed into the gravel like a discarded coin. The study lay at the rear of the manor, accessible via a French door that opened from the terrace, a room designed for the contemplation of campaigns, real or horticultural. Its walls were paneled in dark oak, polished to a gleam that reflected the light from tall, leaded windows overlooking the hollow. Bookshelves groaned under volumes of military history. Caesar's Gallic Wars, Clausewitz's on war, and dog-eared tomes on rose cultivation from the Royal Horticultural Society. A massive desk of mahogany dominated the space, its surface a battlefield of papers. Ledgers bound in cracked leather, correspondence pinned with brass jacks, and a brass inkwell shaped like a cannon. Before the empty grate lay a Persian rug, its intricate patterns faded from years of boot heels and restless pacing. And there, in the high-backed chair of oxblood leather that had cradled generations of Hargrove decisions, sat, or rather slumped, the Colonel himself. He was a tableau of interrupted authority, head lolled back against the chair's wings, mouth agape in what might have been a command or a curse. His right hand still clutching a fountain pen as if to underscore a final decree. His complexion, usually ruddy from hill walks and robust port, had mottled to an unnatural blue, veins standing proud on his neck like rivers on a map. The jacket of his tweed suit hung open, waistcoat buttons strained against a belly softened by retirement's indulgences. No blood marred the scene. No furniture upended in frenzy. Only the teacup, porcelain fine as eggshell, balanced precariously on the desk's edge beside the open ledger. Its contents had cooled to a murky dregs, a faint greenish film clinging to the rim. "Marple, Mrs. Ives," Thorne said, his voice pitched low as if afraid to wake the dead. "You've heard then. A tragedy, pure and simple. Reggie, Colonel Hargrove, appears to have suffered a cardiac arrest. The heart, that capricious organ, strikes without warning. I was summoned by the lad here." He nodded at Tommy, who hovered in the doorway like a shadow. Not 10 minutes passed. No pulse, no respiration. Rigors setting in already. It must have happened shortly after luncheon. Mrs. Ives, dabbing at her eyes with renewed vigor, sank onto a nearby ottoman, her ample frame quivering. "Oh, Elias, poor Reggie, such a vital man, always barking orders at the flower show committee. And now, this. What will become of the manor? Of sweet Evelyn? Thorne placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, though his gaze flicked uneasily to the teacup. Evelyn will need our support, that's certain. As for the manor, the will shall speak in due course. But first the constable must be notified. Formalities, you understand. Though there's no whiff of foul play here. Reggie's heart has murmured for months. I prescribed digitalis only last quarter, though he was lax about it. Tea at 3, every day without fail. That was his ritual. Likely the strain of the heat or a faulty valve giving way. Miss Marple, who had edged unobtrusively into the room, her presence as unobtrusive as a moth at dusk, bent slightly to peer at the desk. Her nostrils flared delicately at that herbal tang, her mind already sifting details like tea leaves in a strainer. The ledger lay open to a page of meticulous entries, expenditures on rose fertilizers, deductions for Potts's inefficiency. A line slashed through an entry for Thorne consultation, unnecessary. And the teacup, the teacup. Its saucer bore a faint ring of moisture and that residue. Not the innocent stain of tannin, but something verdant, almost algal, as if a leaf had steeped too long in the brew. Potts's gruff mutter, laced with disbelief. A distant clink of porcelain. Perhaps Evelyn preparing a tray for the inevitable callers. Mrs. Ives rose, linking arms with Miss Marple. Come, Jane. Let's leave the men to their grim duties. A cup of something fortifying at my cottage, perhaps. This air, it's turned quite oppressive. Miss Marple allowed herself to be steered toward the French door, but not before casting a final glance at the study, at the colonel's rigid form, the ledger's accusing columns, the teacup's silent testimony. Outside, the roses nodded in mocking serenity, their thorns glinting in the sun. Buttercup Hollow, with its buttersoft name, had entertained a serpent in its garden. And Miss Marple, ever the gardener of truths, felt the first stirrings of that familiar itch, the unraveling of a knot, one careful pull at a time. As they retreated down the drive, the cry of a magpie pierced the afternoon, a harbinger, some said, of sorrow to come. Miss Marple tucked a sprig of lavender into her basket, its scent a quiet counterpoint to the poison she sensed blooming unseen. The hollow's shadow had fallen, but the light of reason would pierce it, thread by fragile thread. Chapter 2. Whispers Among the Roses. The dawn that followed Colonel Hargrove's untimely departure crept over St. Mary Mead like a hesitant bride, veiled in a mist that clung to the meadows and softened the edges of the world. Buttercup Hollow, usually a cradle of drowsy contentment, awoke to a hush broken only by the tentative coos of wood pigeons and the distant lowing of cows from Farmer Duncan's pastures. News, that swiftest of couriers in village life, had traveled through the night on the wings of hushed telephone calls and furtive knocks at back doors. By the time the sun burned off the dew, the Hollow's lane was alive with the subdued traffic of concern. A baker's boy on his bicycle, basket laden with loaves that would go uneaten. Mrs. Prendergast from the post office, flags and set the kettle humming on the range. She moved with the efficient grace of long practice, her apron pockets bulging with twist of paper for spills and a duster for perpetual dust motes. "There now, ma'am," Cherry said, placing a tray before her mistress with a clatter of silverware. "Porridge with honey from the apiary, none of that nasty shop stuff, and a pot of your Darjeeling, Weak as you like. Though after yesterday's doings, I shouldn't wonder if you'd prefer something stronger. That poor colonel, cold as a herring in his chair, and not a soul the wiser till the lad found him. The whole village is in a twitter. Mrs. Grimshaw's already been round to the vicar, wringing her hands like she's kneading dough for a funeral bake. Miss Marple accepted the spoon with a murmur of thanks, her eyes distant as she gazed out the window. Beyond the glass, the buttercups trembled in the breeze, their golden heads a mocking echo of the hollow's name. Twittering birds make for poor witnesses, Cherry, but they often hear the worm before it surfaces. The colonel's passing was precipitate, shall we say. Hearts do falter, of course. Mine own skips a beat now and then over a dropped stitch, but one cannot help pondering the particulars. That teacup, for instance, and the door ajar. Trifles, perhaps, but as my nephew Raymond is fond of quoting, the devil's in the details. Cherry snorted softly, wiping her hands on her apron. Devil indeed. If you ask me, it's that nasty temper of his caught up with him. Sacked half the village at one time or another. Potts the gardener, young Larkins's paw over a botched gutter. Mark my words, someone's breathing easier this morning. She paused, glancing at the clock on the mantel. A brass affair shaped like a pineapple, ticking with ponderous inevitability. Will you be wanting the blue shawl today, ma'am? Chilly for July, with the mist. Miss Marple nodded absently, her thoughts already threading through the night's reflections. Sleep had come Bloom of Buttercup Hollow's social vine, patroness of the Flower Guild, pianist at village recitals, and latterly, the object of much speculation regarding her future at the manor. She carried a small reticule of embroidered silk, its tassels trembling as her hands twisted the drawstrings, and in her other arm a basket veiled in muslin, from which emanated the faint aroma of lavender shortbread. "Miss Marple," Evelyn began, her voice a quiver of silk threads fraying at the edge. "Forgive this unannounced call. I know it's barely past 9, but sleep evaded me like a will-o'-the-wisp. After yesterday, Uncle Reggie, I simply had to speak with someone wise, someone outside the fray. May I?" She gestured to the chintz armchair opposite, its cushions plump as overfed cats. Miss Marple rose with fluid courtesy, gesturing to the seat. "My dear Miss Thorne, you honor Lavender Lodge. Pray, sit and compose yourself. Cherry, a fresh pot, if you please, and cups for 2. The air grows chill with solitude. Company warms the bones as well as the tea." As Cherry bustled off, Miss Marple settled once more, her knitting basket at her feet like a faithful hound. She regarded Evelyn with the gentle scrutiny of a gardener assessing a storm-battered bloom, not probing, but patient, inviting the petals to unfold of their own accord. Evelyn sank into the chair, her reticule spilling onto her lap like spilled secrets. She extracted a handkerchief, fine lawn edged with lace, and pressed it to her lips before dabbing at eyes that, upon closer inspection, bore no trace of tears, dry as the ink in an unused well. "You must think me the veriest heartless creature, Miss Marple, descending upon you thus. But the manor, it's a mausoleum this morning. Mrs. Grimshaw moves like a ghost in the passages, polishing silver that will never tarnish again. And poor Uncle Reggie lies in the parlor, draped in Holland covers as if he were a piece of furniture awaiting auction. The doctor says heart, but my own aches with everything unsaid." Miss Marple inclined her head, her needles clicking softly as she like mice in the wainscoting. The conservatory repairs alone cost a fortune. Mr. Larkins hounded him weekly. That great bear of a man with his invoices like indictments. And the taxes, post-war, they bite deeper than a winter frost. Uncle railed at the accounts last month, slashing entries with his pen as if they were enemy dispatches. "Evelyn," he snapped, "if you want silks and symphonies, earn them." As if I hadn't forsaken London for this rural idol to please him. She paused, unfolding the muslin from her basket to reveal the shortbread. Golden triangles dusted with sugar, still warm from the oven. "I baked these in a daze, lavender from the knot garden, his favorite. A foolish gesture now, but one clings to rituals in chaos." She offered the plate, her fingers trembling slightly, and Miss Marple accepted a piece, nibbling it with appreciation. The flavor was subtle, floral with an undercurrent of earth, comforting yet laced with the faint bitterness of oversteeped leaves. "Rituals are the threads that bind us, Miss Thorne," Miss Marple replied, her voice a soothing cadence. "Yet they can fray under strain. These debts. Did your uncle confide in you? Or were there visitors to stir the pot? Major Bentley, I hear, was a frequent shadow at the gates." Evelyn's lips tightened. A flicker of something sharper than grief. Resentment, perhaps, or the guarded gleam of one who knows more than she shares. Bentley, that limping fox, with his tales of Timbuktu and his IOUs yellowed as old teeth. Uncle owed him from their regimental days. Cards at Monte Carlo, or so the whispers go. He called yesterday, bold as brass, pounding the knocker like a drum major. I heard raised voices from the morning room. "Pay up or rue it, Reggie." But Uncle sent him packing with a flea in his ear. Then there was Mr. Potts, skulking in the roses, muttering about docked wages. And Pa, Mr. Larkins, lurking by the postern with his ledger, pressing for the conservatory glass. Even linen. There. Sobs are the rain that clears the air. Your uncle was a fortress, but even fortresses have chinks. Rest assured, the truth will out, like cream rising in the jug. As Evelyn composed herself, dabbing at her cheeks with renewed vigor, the latch clicked once more. This time it was Mrs. Ives who breezed in, her floral skirts a whirlwind of petticoats and her cheeks flushed from the uphill climb. In her arms nestled a basket of speckled eggs, fresh from her hens, their shells still dusted with straw. "Jane Marple, and Miss Thorne as I live and breathe." Cherry signaled from the kitchen window, smoke from the chimney, I thought. But 'twas company I scented. "Eggs for your larder, dears. Daisy laid a double dozen this morn," as if she knew grief was afoot. And gossip, alas, hatches faster than chicks. The whole of St. Mary Mead is abuzz. The constables poking about the manor like ferrets in a henhouse. Dr. Thorne muttering of autopsies, fancy. And that Bentley fellow slinking off to the Blue Boar with a face like thunder. She deposited the basket on the sideboard with a flourish, then drew up a stool, fanning herself with a copy of The Lady magazine purloined from the waiting room. Evelyn rose, murmuring excuses about duties at the manor, and slipped away with a grateful curtsy, her brooch, a emerald cabochon set in gold, said to be a token from the colonel, catching the light like a verdant eye. Mrs. Ives watched her go, then leaned in, voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. A sweet gel, but marked, Jane. That brooch was earmarked for the church roof fund, Colonel's pet project after the war damage. He wore it like a grudge when she appeared in it at the last guild meeting. Charity begins at home, quoth he, but his home was a miser's vault. Miss Marple poured tea for her friend, the steam rising in fragrant curls. Grudges are the weeds in every garden, Arabella. Yet weeds teach us the aspect her knitting, rising with purpose. Cherry, she called, donning her blue shawl against the deceptive chill. Mind the house. I fancy a stroll to the manor, roses to admire, and perhaps a petal or two to ponder. The hollow whispers, and I mean to cup my ear to its secrets. As she stepped into the sun, the buttercups bowed before her like courtiers, their gold a promise of truths buried deep. The Colonel's kingdom had fallen silent, but in the rustle of leaves and the scent of turned earth, Miss Marple heard the first fragile echoes of motive and murder. Chapter 3. The Gardener's Grudge. The afternoon sun of that fateful Wednesday in July draped Buttercup Hollow in a golden haze, as if the very light conspired to soften the edges of sorrow and coax the world back toward its verdant complacency. Hargrove Manor's gardens, sprawling across the hollow's southern slope like a living tapestry, were a testament to nature's indomitable spirit and to the iron will of the man who had once commanded them. From the manicured lawns that swept down to the wilder fringes of the dell, where buttercups gave way to untamed foxgloves and nettles, the plots unfolded in disciplined splendor, herbaceous borders ablaze with salvias and snapdragons, their colors a defiant palette against the encroaching gray of grief, espaliered fruit trees along the walls, apples and pears ripening in orderly rows like soldiers on review. And, at the heart of it all, the rose garden, a circular parterre of hybrid teas and floribundas, their petals unfurling in shades of blush and blood, as if the blooms themselves mourned their master's passing with a subtle droop. Miss Jane Marple approached this floral kingdom with the reverent tread of one entering a cathedral, her borrowed trowel from Mrs. Ives tucked into the pocket of her sensible gabardine skirt, like a talisman against deception. She had quipped to her friend that morning, over a shared elevenses of seed cake and Earl Grey, that the tool was for weeding out the truth from the tangle. A jest that masked the keen purpose driving her steps. The cottage's confines suggested it was more the sherry decanter than sorrow that ailed him. Miss Marple slipped through, her sensible Oxfords whispering over the gravel, and paused at the forecourt to orient herself. The fountain bubbled on, its water a silvery thread that caught the light and scattered it like misplaced diamonds. To her left the conservatory loomed, its glass panes steamed from within, where the humid air nurtured camellias and citruses in defiant tropical exile. A faint creak emanated from its side door, unlatched, swaying gently in the breeze, as if the structure itself exhaled a sigh of relief at its master's absence. Miss Marple noted it, filing the detail away like a pressed leaf in her mental herbarium. Doors, like mouths, spoke volumes when left ajar. She veered right, toward the gardens proper, where the air grew heady with the perfume of stock and sweet William, undercut by the loamy tang of freshly turned soil. Paths of crushed oyster shells meandered between the beds, their surfaces crunching softly underfoot, leading her past the vegetable plot, rows of runner beans climbing poles like Jacob's ladder, cabbages furled tight as secrets, and into the rose garden's embrace. Here the Colonel's hand was evident in every thorn-clipped stem and mulched root, labels of copper wire inscribed with varietal names, Iceberg for its pristine whites, Ina Harkness, for its crimson vigor, stood sentinel, a horticultural honor roll. Yet even in this ordered paradise signs of discord peeked through. A spray of petals scattered like confetti from a hasty pruning. A watering can tipped on its side with soil spilling from its spout. And curiously, a pair of leather gloves discarded on a stone bench, their fingers curled as if in perpetual grasp. It was amid the rhododendrons, a thicket of leathery leaves and bruised purple blooms that towered like ancient guardians at the garden's perimeter, that Miss Marple spied her quarry. Mr. Silas Potts, head gardener for 2 decades and counting, was engaged in a vigorous assault on a wayward branch, his secateurs snapping with the ferocity of "Rest his soul. Must have cherished such devotion as yours." Potts paused mid-clip, the secateurs hovering like a guillotine blade. He straightened slowly, wiping a grimed forearm across his brow, leaving a streak of earth that accentuated the furrows of his scowl. His gaze raked over her, appraising, not unkind, but laced with the resentment of one who views interlopers as aphids on his prized blooms. "Miss Marple, ain't it? The spinster from the village, borrowing Simmons's place. Devotion, you say? Bah! 20 years I've bent my back for Hargrove, sweating blood to keep his roses marching in step. And what does it earn me? A dock in wages for a stray aphid last se'nnight. Aphids, miss, as if a man could scour Eden clean of every blasted bug. The Colonel's kingdom was his roses, aye, but he ruled it with a whip hand. Snip here, mulch there, and heaven help the petal that drooped. Now he's gone, cold in his study, and I'm left to the wolves, wondering if the new broom, Miss Evelyn likely, will sweep me out with the weeds." His voice was a gravelly rumble, thick with the burr of rural dialects honed on the anvil of hard labor, and he punctuated his words by snapping the secateurs once more, the severed branch falling with a soft thud to the mulch below. There was no mistaking the bitterness in his tone. It coiled like bindweed around each syllable, but beneath it lurked a weariness, the quiet ache of loyalty betrayed. Miss Marple, undaunted, drew nearer, her trowel glinting in the sun as she knelt by a nearby bed of foxgloves. Their tall spires nodded gracefully, bells of purple and white heavy with the promise of summer rain, and she traced a finger along a veined leaf, her touch light as a butterfly's landing. "Gone suddenly, yes," she murmured, her voice a gentle counterpoint to his bluster. A blow to the hollow's rhythm, like a conductor's baton stilled mid-phrase. Yet gardens endure, Mr. Potts, as do those who tend them. Tell me, potting shed all afternoon, ears full of nothing but bird song and the drip of the rain barrel. Alibis solid as Kentish clay, if that's what you're fishing for." He paused, wiping his brow again, and in that momentary lapse his gaze softened, flickering to a small plaque nailed to the garden wall, brass letters faded but legible. "In memory of Clara Hargrove, beloved wife, 1890 to 1948. Her hands tended these roots. The Colonel's late wife, whose gentle influence had once tempered his severity, or so the village tales went." Potts followed Miss Marple's eyes to it, and a shadow crossed his features, softening the bramble of his mustache. "She was the bloom in this briar patch, Mrs. Hargrove. Planted that sundial yonder with her own hands. Time waits for no rose," she'd say, laughing. The Colonel, he withered after her going. Turned the gardens into battlefields, every weed an enemy. Docked my pay not for aphids, truth be told, but 'cause I suggested plantin' her favorite lavender border again. "Superstition," he roared. Superstition, my foot. It was memory he couldn't prune away. Miss Marple rose slowly, brushing soil from her knees with the precision of one folding laundry. The foxglove's leaf, velvety and cool, she slipped into her pocket unbidden. A habit from girlhood days spent poring over her father's herbal, where digitalis was lauded for mending hearts yet warned as a poison in excess. Memory is the deepest root, Mr. Potts, and hardest to unearth. Yet in your vigilance did aught else stir? The conservatory door, for instance. I noted creaks like an old hinge. Did it sigh open that day, bearing an uninvited guest? Potts's eyes narrowed, bushy brows knitting like storm clouds. He glanced over his shoulder, as if the rhododendrons themselves might eavesdrop, then lowered his voice to a rumble. Aye, it did. Round about 3 bells, just as the grandfather in the hall told. Leaf. She thanked Potts with a nod, pressing a biscuit from her basket into his calloused palm. A small fortification for the laborer, and turned her steps toward the potting shed, a lean-to of weathered boards at the garden's edge, its door ajar like the conservatory's twin. Inside, the air was close and earthy, shelves sagging under jars of bone meal and slug bait, seed packets yellowed with age. A workbench bore the scars of countless grafts, knives honed to scalpels, twine coiled like serpents, and a ledger of plantings, meticulous in Potts's blocky hand. No anomalies here, save a faint herbal residue on the edge of a mixing bowl, greenish and acrid, reminiscent of the study's with. Miss Marple's fingers itched for her notebook, but propriety stayed her. Instead, she committed it to memory, another thread in the weaving. As she emerged, the sun dipping toward the hollow's rim and casting long shadows that clawed at the roses, Potts called after her, his voice gruff but laced with reluctant respect. Mind the thorns, miss. They hide in the prettiest blooms, and draw blood when least expected. Miss Marple smiled faintly over her shoulder, her pocketed foxglove a secret talisman. Thorns are nature's caution, Mr. Potts, but one learns to glove against them, or better yet to trace their prick back to the stem. The garden held more secrets than petals, she mused, retreating down the path. Digitalis for hearts, oleander for oblivion, a red herring in purple bells, or a clue blooming in plain sight. The grudge of a gardener was but one root. Others delved deeper toward the manor's shadowed heart. And Miss Marple, ever the patient cultivator, meant to shake the boughs until the truths rained down. Chapter 4. Debts and Deceptions. As the sun dipped below the rim of Buttercup Hollow, painting the sky in strokes of bruised plum and hesitant gold, the village of St. Mary Mead surrendered to the velvet hush of evening. The day's fretful buzz, whispers of the colonel's passing, village's unofficial confessional, where tongues loosened under the influence of shepherd's pie and a pint of bitter, and where the unwary might betray a slip of the mask over their evening repast. She arrived as the clock in the tower struck 6, the chimes rolling down the high street like a gentle admonition against haste. Her Oxfords, dusted from the garden paths, clicked softly on the flagstones as she pushed open the heavy oak door, its hinges protesting with a groan that echoed the hollow's own weariness. A wave of warmth enveloped her, the hearth roaring with apple logs that snapped and popped like gossiping crones, the air thick with the aromas of roasting mutton, hops, and the faint, comforting tang of beeswax polish on the settles. The tap room was moderately thronged, a tableau of rural conviviality tempered by recent tragedy. Farmhands in corduroy breeches, nursing tankards at scarred elm tables, their faces shadowed by flat caps. A pair of spinsters from the sewing circle, heads bent over a shared sherry with the intensity of code breakers. And behind the bar, mine host, Mr. Wilkins, a portly figure with a mustache like a hearthbrush and a ledger that balanced as precariously as his beer taps. He greeted Miss Marple with a bob of deference, his eyes twinkling behind pince-nez perched on the bridge of a nose veined like a rose leaf. "Evening, Miss Marple, ma'am. A table by the fire?" "And the usual, cider, dry as a vicar's wit." She smiled, her lace cap nodding in acquiescence. "You read the room as well as the bills, Mr. Wilkins. Cider it is, and perhaps a portion of your shepherd's pie. None of that minced mutton from the county supplier's, mind. The real thing, with leeks from your own plot." As he bustled off, apron strings flapping like semaphore flags, Miss Marple claimed a nook by the inglenook, its stone flanks warmed to a toasty embrace. She arranged her shawl, a soft wool in heather tones, knitted during a particularly tedious parish meeting, and extracted her knitting from her basket. Needles poised, face like that, not without a nudge from the devil. Polly nodded, wide-eyed, polishing a glass to a spurious gleam. It was the entrance of Mr. Harold Larkins that stirred the room's pot to a fresh simmer. The local builder announced himself with the boom of authority that came from years of shouting over hammer strikes and saw winds. A figure as solid as the oak timbers he hewed, with shoulders broad as a barn door and a belly that spoke of Sunday roasts well savored. In his late 40s, Larkins was a man of the soil turned artisan, hands calloused as old leather, nails ingrained with the dust of mortar, and a face ruddy from wind and weather, framed by side whiskers that curled like wood shavings. His attire was practical Sunday best, a tweed jacket patched at the elbows, waistcoat straining over a watch chain heavy as a fetter, and trousers held aloft by braces that creaked with each step. He carried a battered briefcase, its leather scarred like a battlefield map, and his laugh, deep and gravelly, like boots on a quarry path, rolled out as he clapped a hand on the bar. "Polly, lass, a pint of your best, none of that weak sister's brew, and tell your da the gutter on the bakehouse holds, though the lead flashed wants a mend come autumn." His eyes, blue and merry under brows like saltire beams, swept the room, alighting on Miss Marple with a spark of recognition. "Ah, and if it ain't the lady of Lavender Lodge herself. Come for the grub or the gab, Miss Marple? Pull up a pew. There's room at my board for a keen ear and a sharper eye." Miss Marple allowed a faint smile to crease her cheeks, setting aside her needles with the precision of a fencer sheathing her blade. "A bit of both, Mr. Larkins, as the good Lord provides in equal measure. Your invitation honors the pie more than the company, I suspect, but pray, join me if your tankard permits." She gestured to the settle opposite, its cushions worn to a welcoming sag, and Wilkins, materializing like a benevolent sprite, deposited her cider and a steaming plate. Pastry golden and flaky, flecked with rosemary, encasing a savory heart of lamb and Larkins, especially under the weight of worries. "Your work at the manor, those conservatory repairs, must have brought you often to the Colonel's ear. A man of ledgers, I hear, with a quill as sharp as your chisels." Larkins's joviality dimmed, his tankard pausing midway to his lips, foam clinging to his whiskers like hoarfrost. He set it down with deliberate care, the thud resounding like a gavel's fall, and leaned forward, elbows on the table scattering breadcrumbs like confetti at a wake. "Ah, you've pricked the blister, ma'am." 300 quid he owed me, 300, for that glass palace he tacked on the east wing. Panes fit for a duke's orangery, leaded lights with fleur-de-lis etching, and the frame in seasoned oak to weather a gale. I called yesterday, hat in hand, to press the matter, polite as a curate at tea, mind you. "Reggie," says I, "the lads need their wages, and the yard's bare without that brass." What does he do? Slams the door in my face, roaring like a bull in a china shop. "Larkins, you'll see your pennies when the cows give cream. If not for my Tommy delivering the post that afternoon, well, I'd have been the one knocking at 3, not the lad." His voice rose on the tide of recalled indignation, drawing glances from the nearby tables. Hargreaves pausing mid-tale, Mrs. Bartlett's sherry glass hovering like a suspended judgment. Larkins waved a ham-like hand, dismissing the audience with a bluff grin. "Steady on, Hal. Don't wake the ghosts." But truth be told, Miss Marple, it rankled. The Colonel's a skinflint wrapped in serge. Docked me a tenner last harvest for overtime on the roses, when Potts and I sweated buckets hauling that granite edging. Man could squeeze a shilling till it screamed. If hearts break from temper, his was primed like a powder keg. Miss Marple sipped her cider, the tartness a foil to the pie's richness, and tilted her head in that way she had, encouraging, like a confessor's nod without the stole. Themselves leaned in. A farmhand chuckling over a spilled pint, the spinsters clucking like hens at a crumb. Miss Marple's needles resumed their click-click, a soothing underscore to the tale, but her mind mapped the threads. Grimshaw's trimmer, the unsugared tea, a door slammed not in wood but in trust. Jane's chafe indeed, Mr. Larkins. And you, after the rebuff, where did your steps lead? The yard, perhaps, to hammer out frustrations on an anvil? Larkins barked a laugh, short and sharp as a chisel's bite, and drained his pint, signaling Polly with a raised finger. "Frustrations? Aye, but not on anvil. On the Blue Boar here, drowning 'em in Wilkins's brew. Half the crew was with me till closin'. Hargreaves yonder can vouch, and young Tom Price from the forge, swearing on his mother's Bible. Alibi's tighter than a miser's fist, Miss Marple. But between us—" He leaned closer, voice dropping to a rumble like thunder in the hollow. "I reckon it's the Major, that Bentley. Limps in yesterday all brass and monocle, demanding his gaming debts like a bailiff at the door. Colonel laughed him out, or so Tommy overheard. Pay when pigs fly, Percy." But Bentley's eyes were cold as December. Man's a warhorse gone rogue, and rogues settle scores quiet-like. Miss Marple nodded, her expression mild as milk, though inwardly the pieces slotted with the satisfaction of a jigsaw nearing completion. Bentley, the limping shadow in Potts's garden, the wormwood whiff, perhaps, from his tonic flask. Yet Larkins's bluster masked a softer grain she sensed. The briefcase, unopened but heavy with unpaid invoices, spoke of a man teetering on bankruptcy's brink, his joviality a plaster over cracks. Scores settle in shadows, true enough. But observe, Mr. Larkins, the shepherd's pie here is a marvel. Your gutters may leak, but Wilkins's pastry harbor more than moths in the hollow. Miss Marple murmured farewells, stepping into the cooling dusk where stars pricked the indigo vault like tentative stitches. The lane homeward wound past the churchyard, yews sentinel silent, and Lavender Lodge's lights beckoned like a faithful lantern. Alone by her hearth later, embers glowing in the grate, she pondered. Debts were motives etched deep, but Larkins's alibi held via witnesses, his bluster a veil over fear. The tea tray, though, Grimshaw's shake, the dropped pot, a ripple in the calm, pointing perhaps to the scullery's hidden hand. The circle widened, suspects like planets in uneasy orbit, but Miss Marple, with her needles and her notions, meant to chart the gravitational pull toward truth. Chapter 5. The Housekeeper's Secret. Dawn broke over Buttercup Hollow with the tentative grace of a watercolor wash, mist rising from the dew-kissed meadows like the breath of slumbering giants. The year was 1952, and July's warmth had not yet asserted its full dominion. Instead, a cool pallor clung to the air, veiling the oaks in gossamer and muting the buttercups to a subdued silver. St. Mary Mead stirred slowly under this shroud, roosters crowing muffled challenges from distant farmsteads, the first milk float rumbling like a hesitant prelude to the day's symphony. In Lavender Lodge, Miss Jane Marple had risen before the light, her internal clock as reliable as the mantled timepiece that now ticked softly in the parlor, its hands creeping toward 5. Sleep had been a fitful companion the night past, her dreams a labyrinth of teacups tipping into abyssal ledgers, and roses uncoiling like serpents from the Colonel's rigid fingers. She had spent the small hours by candlelight, her commonplace book open on her lap, jotting fragments. Green residue, herbal, unsweet refusal. Door's sigh. Trifles, perhaps, but as she often reflected, the hem of truth was stitched from such threads. Cherry, ever the bulwark against domestic chaos, had anticipated her mistress's early rising. The kitchen glowed with the ruddy promise of the range, where a kettle sang a low aria and porridge bubbled in an iron pot, scented with cinnamon from the spice drawer. "Up with the lark again, ma'am?" Cherry inquired, her voice a warm rumble as she ladled the steaming oats into a bowl. She was a woman of unyielding practicality. 42 summers etched in the laugh lines around her eyes and the sturdy set of her shoulders, her hair confined in a no-nonsense bun beneath a mob cap. "After that blue boar jaunt, I thought you'd sleep like the dead. Larkins's yarns can curdle milk, let alone dreams. Biscuits to take? I've baked a fresh batch, oatmeal, with raisins plump as secrets, Miss Purposeful Lightness." The lane to Hargrove Manor unfurled like a ribbon unspooled from the hollow's heart, bordered by hedgerows where dew-jeweled spiderwebs trembled like harp strings. Robins hopped along the verges, their breasts puffed in avian bravado, and the air hummed with the first bees, drunk on nectar from the wild thyme. She passed the Larkins' yard on the rise, a clutter of timber stacks and wheelbarrows, where young Tommy already swept the sawdust, his freckled face earnest under a cap too large for his frame. He doffed it with a shy grin. "Mornin', Miss Marple." "Pa's still snoring off the boar, says the pie was worth the headache." She nodded encouragement, her eyes noting the fresh invoice pinned to the gatepost. Hargrove Manor, conservatory balance due, 150 pounds remaining. Debts like ivy crept onward. The manor's gates loomed sooner than expected, their iron filigree softened by morning's haze. The forecourt lay hushed, the fountain's bubble a solitary murmur, and from the courtyard beyond came the rhythmic thwack of rugs being beaten, a sound as insistent as a heartbeat, driving out the night's dust and doldrums. Miss Marple rounded the corner to find Mrs. Grimshaw at her labors, a formidable Amazon in the field of domestic warfare, 60 years of unyielding service etched in the ramrod of her spine, and the iron-gray coils of hair pinned like a battle standard beneath her cap. Her apron, starched to the crackle of new vellum, was girded about a waist still trim from decades of portion control, and her sleeves, rolled to the elbows, revealed forearms corded like mooring ropes. She wielded a carpet beater with the precision of a fencer, a flat implement of woven willow, whistling through the air to smite a turkey rug draped over a laurel hedge. Dust motes danced in the eddies, golden in the slanting light, and her face, square-jawed, with cheeks flushed from exertion and eyes like polished agates, betrayed no grief, only the grim resolve of duty unbroken. "Mrs. Grimshaw," Miss Marple ventured, her voice pitched to carry over branch. "Ghosts are but echoes, Mrs. Grimshaw, and I am no exorcist, merely a neighbor, seeking the comfort of routine in uncertain times. Might I trouble you for a glimpse of the study? The Colonel's sanctum, so masculine, so steadfast. A peak steadies the spirit, like a familiar hymn. Grimshaw's lips thinned to a seam, the beater tapping her palm like a judge's gavel. She glanced toward the manor's rear, where the study's French doors stood sentinel, curtains drawn like lowered blinds. Routine, eh? That's a word the Colonel favored. Grimshaw, routine is the bulwark against chaos, he'd bark, ledger in fist. Very well, but mind the dust. The boy's not polished since, well. She led the way across the courtyard, her boots, polished black Oxfords, sensible as sermons, clipping on the flagstones, the rug abandoned like a vanquished foe. The manor awoke around them in fragments, a scullery door ajar, spilling the scent of soda crystals and damp flannel. The faint clink of porcelain from the butler's pantry, where Jenkins likely nursed his palpitations with a restorative. And, from the upper galleries, the muffled tread of maids tiptoeing like mice in a granary. They entered via the servants' passage, a dim corridor paneled in scoured pine, walls hung with copper molds for jellies and a calendar from the Royal Horticultural Society, marked with the Colonel's rose-pruning dates. Grimshaw's domain, the kitchen, lay to the left, a vasty cavern of slate flags and iron ranges, where copper pots gleamed like burnished moons, and the air held the ghosts of yesterday's roast, beef, rare, with Yorkshire puddings puffed to indignation. The study, however, was a realm apart, a bastion of oak and leather, untouched since the tragedy, as if time itself had paused in reverence, or reluctance. Grimshaw pushed open the French door with a creak that echoed the conservatory's sigh, and they stepped into the sanctum. The air was stale, heavy with the residue, the faint, lingering whiff of that acrid herbal note, now mingled with the must of confinement. Grimshaw hovered by the threshold, arms folded like a barricade, her agate eyes flicking over the scene with the detachment of one who had dusted it 1,000 times. There it is, Miss Marple. His kingdom reduced to cobwebs. Sat here every afternoon, 3 sharp, tea tray at elbow, ledger like a lover. Grimshaw, he'd command. The Assam, strong. No milk, mind. It clouds the reckoning. Trusted me with the keys to every drawer, every secret. 30 years. from the day Mrs. Hargrove hired me fresh from service in Norwich. And now, her voice cracked then. A hairline fracture in the starch, and she turned away, dabbing at her eyes with the hem of her apron. Dry eyes, Miss Marple noted, but the gesture ritualistic, a dam against deeper floods. Miss Marple moved to the desk with the unobtrusive grace of a shadow. Her fingers, gloved in kid, soft as conscience, trailing the ledger's edge. The entries leaped like accusations. A line for E. Thorne, allowance, overdrawn, slashed with red ink. Another for charity, church fund, deferred. The Colonel's parsimony laid bare. Such trust is rarer than honesty in a politician, Mrs. Grimshaw, she observed mildly, her tone a balm. You were the manor's keel, steadying the ship through tempests. Yet even keels spring leaks under pressure. Did the Colonel confide his burdens, or were there shadows in the accounts that darkened his brow? Grimshaw whirled back, color blooming in her cheeks like spilled claret, her capable hands clenching into fists that could knead dough or knead confessions with equal aplomb. Confide, betray more like. Accused me, he did, me, Agatha Grimshaw, pilfering from the petty cash like some scullery thief. 5 pounds short, woman. Explain or pack your traps, he thundered, not 2 days past, slamming the ledger like Judgment Day. I'd brought his tea that very afternoon, stilled, her gaze sharpening to a blade. She straightened, smoothing her apron with automatic fervor, the starch reasserting itself like a corset laced anew. Sweetened? Bitter as wormwood, that brew. And he refused the bowl outright. No sugar today, Grimshaw. It sticks in the craw like unpaid debts. I'd steeped it strong, his Assam blend from the locked caddy. But the leaves, off somehow. Greenish, like overbrewed nettle. Poured it myself, watched him sip once, grimaced, set it down. Routine be damned, he muttered, and turned back to his scribbles. If that's poison in a pot, Miss Marple, then I'm the Queen of Sheba. Miss Marple rose, her eyes drawn to a lower drawer of the desk, unlocked, ajar like an invitation. With Grimshaw's nod, she eased it open, revealing a chaos of receipts and ribbon-tied bundles. Invoices from the glazier, a lock of hair labeled CH, infancy, and, crumpled at the back like a discarded gauntlet, a note in the Colonel's hand. Grimshaw, accounts short 5 pounds. Explain by noon or dismissed. No excuses. The paper crackled under her touch, ink fresh enough to smudge her glove, and she folded it away, tucking it into her basket with the foxglove leaf from Potts's garden. A pairing of verdant suspicions, a motive sharp as a bread knife, Miss Marple mused aloud, her voice soft as she closed the drawer. Yet knives cut both ways, my dear. This note, did you see it before the event? Grimshaw shook her head, rising with renewed steel. Noon came and went. I was in the linen press, folding the Colonel's dress shirts. Starched collars, everyone. When Tommy's cry echoed. Well, the note was the least of it, but dismissed. After 30 years, I'd sooner swallow laudanum than steal a sou. The study seemed to contract around them then, shadows lengthening as the sun climbed. Afternoon light of that mid-July Thursday slanted through the lace curtains of Lavender Lodge like golden filigree, casting intricate patterns across the parlor's turkey rug and gilding the edges of Miss Jane Marple's knitting basket. It was precisely 4 o'clock, the hour when St. Mary Mead observed the sacred rite of tea with the fervor of a minor sacrament, and the cottage hummed with the anticipatory hush of hospitality. The range in the kitchen had been coaxed to a gentle simmer, where Cherry labored over a tray with the devotion of a vestal tending her flame. A silver teapot etched with climbing roses, its contents steeping to a robust amber. A tiered stand bearing cucumber sandwiches trimmed to delicate triangles. Scones still warm from the oven with clotted cream and strawberry preserve glistening like rubies. And a plate of seed cake, dense with caraway and lemon zest, sliced into wedges as neat as a tailor's yard. The air was perfumed with bergamot from the tea and the faint, comforting yeast of baking, a counterpoint to the Hollow's lingering pall of mystery. Miss Marple, seated in her wing chair by the window, a relic of her Danvers Street days, upholstered in faded rose damask, adjusted her lace cap with a pin's precision, her silver hair coiled beneath it like a crown of moonlight. She had dispatched Cherry with a note to Major Percival Bentley that very morning, penned in her copperplate hand on lavender stationery. Dear Major, might I impose upon your afternoon for tea? The Hollow's shadows lengthen, and a soldier's clarity would illuminate them. Yours in neighborly regard, J. Marple. Propriety dictated such indirection. One did not summon a gentleman of the buffs like a errant schoolboy, but invited him as an equal to the board. Her motives, however, were as sharp as the needles idle in her lap. Bentley's shadow had loomed large in the whispers. Potts's trampled roses, Larkins's tavern suspicions, Grimshaw's glimpsed silhouette with tray in hand. Echoes of the past, she mused, were the ghosts that haunted the present. And Bentley, with his limp, them with a faint smile. Her blue eyes, keen as a thrush's, magnified slightly by her spectacles, tracing the play of light on their golden heads. Simple souls, she murmured to the empty room. Yet they thrive where thorns abound. A lesson for us all. The mantel clock, a brass beauty shaped like a lyre, inherited from her father, chimed the quarter hour, its notes clear as a post horn when the latch lifted with military snap. Cherry ushered in the guest, her mobcap bobbing like a buoy in a swell. Major Bentley, ma'am, as prompt as the mail train. Shall I pour? Miss Marple rose with fluid courtesy, extending a hand gloved in dove-gray kid. Not yet, Cherry, thank you. Major, you honor us. Do come to the light. The window seat offers the best view of the Hollow's charms. He was a figure from a faded sepia photograph come to life. Tall and gaunt as a lancer's pike, his frame weathered by equatorial suns and monsoon drenches. Clad in a tropical weight suit of drill cotton, its knees bagged from much sitting, and its lapels bearing the faint ghosts of campaign ribbons. At 60, his hair was a silver thatch cropped close to the scalp, his mustache a luxuriant brush waxed to points like bayonets. And from his left eye dangled a monocle on a silk ribbon, glinting like a conspirator's wink. The limp, legacy of a Japanese prison camp in Singapore, or so the village lore ran, manifested in a slight hitch to his step, cane tapping the flags like Morse code. Forward, guard. His eyes, pale gray and darting like a fox scenting the hounds, swept the room before settling on her with punctilious warmth. Madam, he replied. clasping her hand with the dry grip of one unused to tenderness. "The honor is mine. Your note found me at the club. Dreadful hole the blue bore. Wilkins's ale tastes of regret. Tea in civilized quarters is a tonic for these barbarous days." He lowered himself to the window seat, surrendered saber. "Pillar? Aye, with feet of clay and a temper like grape shot. Reggie and I go back to the Buffs. 14, the Marne. Mud up to the Oxters and Fritz singing in the wire. Good man in a scrap, cool as a cucumber under shellfire. Pulled me from a crater once, shell-shocked and senseless. But peacetime? Devil take it, the man soured like milk in the tropics. Cards were his vice. Monte Carlo 28. Roulette and baccarat till dawn. Devilish poor hand, Reggie. Owed me a pretty penny then. 500 quid to be precise, from a run of black that turned red as a Bolshevik's flag. "Percy," he slurred, "the dividend from the tea plantations will square it." That was 29. Plantations went bust in the crash, and so did the debt. Until yesterday. Miss Marple offered the seed cake, its slices fanned like a hand of patience, and he took one absently, nibbling with the abstracted air of a man reviewing dispatches. "Yesterday," she echoed softly, her needles resuming their click-click, a metronome to his tale. "The eve of tragedy." "You called to collect, then?" Bold, in the face of old comradeship. Bentley's laugh was a bark, short and mirthless, echoing off the chintz walls. "Bold? Desperation's better word, madam. The war left me with this." He rapped his cane on the floor, a hollow tattoo. "And a pension that wouldn't keep a sparrow in seed. Invested the lot in a rubber scheme, gone rubbery. Now it's Bentley versus the bailiffs, and Reggie's acres my last hope. Pounded the knocker at 3 sharp, routine like drill, and he receives me in the study, ledger open like a field manual. 'Percy,' says he, all bluster and mustache. 'Debts die with the debtor, or so the poets claim.' Laughed it off, the blackguard. Promised the lot from his next coarse fishing dividend, whatever that codswallop means. I left fuming, cooler heads prevailing. 'Today, Grimshaw, your nettle tea?' No more than that. I decamped to the Roses, limping off with empty pockets and a head full of steam." Miss Marple poured fresh tea, the steam curling like battlefield smoke, and leaned forward, her voice a gentle probe. "A tableau of tensions, Major. Housekeeper, gardener, postboy, all orbiting the fatal hour. And you, the satellite of old scores. Yet one notes the air that day, humid, heavy with the hollow's blooms. Did it carry any unusual freight? Jasmine from the conservatory, perhaps, or something sharper, like the Colonel's special blend." Bentley paused, cake forgotten, his gray eyes narrowing as memory dredged the depths. He swirled his fresh cup, inhaling the bergamot as if testing for treason. "Jasmine. The conservatory's a jungle of it, aye. Clara's legacy, poor soul. She doted on the scent, said it warded melancholy. But yesterday, no blooms so bold. More like wormwood. Bitter stuff, that. Grows wild in the hollow scrub, or so Potts claims. Sharp on the breeze, undercutting the roses like a false flank in the line. Thought it the Major's tonic at first. My flask, you know, with a dash for the nerves. But I'd left it at the club. Odd, now you mention. clung to the study air like cordite after a barrage. Wormwood, the word resonated, a false trail or the bitter root itself, echoing Grimshaw's, bitter as wormwood, and the teacup's residue. Miss Marple filed it away, her expression mild as clotted cream. Wormwood indeed, a herb of absinthe and regret, apt for old campaigns. Speaking of which, you suspect others in this fray. The niece, perhaps, Evelyn Thorne, with her brooch and her burdens. Bentley leaned forward then, his voice dropping to a confidential growl, the monocle swinging like a pendulum of judgment. Between us, Miss Marple. Off the record, as they say in the dispatches. The girl's got Thorne's ear, and the doctors always envied Reggie's acres. Me once in the mess. Card-sharping whispers from the sergeant's club. Cost me stripes, nearly the commission. Forgave it for the Marne's sake, but grudges fester like trench foot. Yesterday's laugh, salt in the wound. But murder, not my style, too messy for a gentleman. Now if you'll pardon the intrusion on your peace. He bowed, monocle flashing farewell, and Cherry materialized to see him out, the door closing with a definitive click. Alone once more, Miss Marple gazed into her teacup's dregs, leaves swirling like troop movements, and smiled to herself, faint as a crescent moon. Wormwood in the wind, a red herring from the scrub, or Bentley's tonic masking deeper drafts. The suspects circled like moths to the manor's flame. Evelyn's glint, Thorne's envy, Grimshaw's tremor, Potts's shears, Larkins's fist. Echoes all, past debts and present pricks. But one note rang false, a dissonance begging resolution. The Hollow's peace was a fragile truce. Miss Marple, with her needles and her notions, meant to conduct the crescendo toward truth. Chapter 7. Threads Unraveling. The village of St. Mary Mead, that quintessential bastion of English eccentricity and understated intrigue, had by the third day following Colonel Hargrove's demise begun to reclaim its rhythms from the jaws of disruption. It was Saturday now, the 5th of July, and the air held the crisp promise of fair weather. A light breeze riffling the leaves of the lime trees along the high street, carrying with it the mingled scents of hay from the meadows and the faint anticipatory tang of frying onions from the fete stalls being erected on the green. The inquest, held that morning in the chilly nave of the parish church, its pews requisitioned as makeshift benches, the air heavy with the must of hassocks and candle wax, had concluded with the ponderous inevitability of a well-rehearsed liturgy. Dr. Elias Thorne, as chief medical witness, had testified with the measured cadence of one reciting a familiar psalm. Cardiac arrest, gentlemen, precipitated by Cora. Once more in the sun-dappled parlor of Lavender Lodge, the pronouncement rang as hollow as a drum without a skin. Natural causes? Perhaps in the broad canvas of mortality, but the devil, as she well knew, cavorted in the fine stitches of detail. The greenish residue on the teacup's rim, the unsweet refusal of a man whose palate demanded sucrose as rigorously as his ledgers demanded balance, the wormwood whiff that lingered like an uninvited specter. Verdicts, like veils, obscured more than they revealed, and Miss Marple, with her basket of wool and her web of whispers, intended to lift the hem and peer beneath. Her suspicions, far from withering under the coroner's decree, had bloomed unchecked. Vibrant as the foxgloves in Potts's border, their purple bells tolling silent warnings. 2 days of quiet inquiry had yielded scant fruit. A note from Mrs. Ives confirming the colonel's sweet tooth. 2 lumps without fail, Jane, I've seen him send back a pot for less. A sidelong glance from young Tommy Larkins at the post office, his freckles paling when she mentioned the Manor's side door. And, most tantalizing, a murmured confidence from Cherry, who had overheard the dairyman's wife gossiping of queer herbs in Grimshaw's scullery bin. Coincidences, the doctor might call them. But Miss Marple had long maintained that coincidence was but Providence's way of remaining anonymous, a divine nudge toward the unraveling of human tangles. It was this divine or deductive impulse that propelled her, shortly after luncheon, a frugal repast of cold chicken and watercress from the cottage garden, toward the village surgery on the High Street's quieter flank. Dr. Elias Thorne's establishment occupied a bow-fronted Georgian house, its fanlight etched with laurel leaves, and its door-knocker shaped like a caduceus, polished to a gleam by the parade of patients who sought his ministrations. The waiting room, paneled in honeyed oak and warmed by a coal scuttle in the grate, smelled of carbolic and camphor, with dog-eared copies of The Lady and Punch scattered crank. Dr. Thorne rose from his swivel chair, a figure of middle-aged propriety in a Harris tweed jacket and bow tie patterned with stethoscopes, his sandy hair receding like a tide exposing the shore of his forehead. His wire-rimmed spectacles caught the light from the sash window, magnifying eyes that were kind but evasive, like a vicar's in the confessional. "Miss Marple," he greeted, extending a hand calloused from the dual trade of scalpel and garden fork. His plot of runner beans was the envy of the allotment society. "To what do I owe this pleasure? Not indigestion from Mrs. Ives's seed cake, I trust. Sit, pray. Miss Featherstone, tea for our guest if you would." He gestured to the leather armchair opposite his desk, its arms worn smooth by generations of anxious elbows. She settled with her customary grace, placing the jam jar on the blotter like a peace offering. "Indigestion of the spirit, doctor, far more persistent than the culinary kind. Your testimony this morning, admirably succinct, yet the heart, that capricious organ, leaves one pondering its whispers. The Colonel's in particular. Did it murmur warnings you alone could hear?" Thorne accepted the jam with a murmur of thanks, setting it beside a stack of prescriptions. Laudanum for the vicar's nerves, aspirin for the squire's gout, and polished his spectacles with a handkerchief monogrammed E.T., the motion a ritual stalling for composure. "Warnings. Reggie was a fortress, Miss Marple, stoic to a fault. Consulted me last month over palpitations after a heated row at the Flower Guild. Prescribed a tincture of digitalis, foxglove extract, you know, to steady the rhythm. Harmless in moderation, strengthens the beat like a drum major's baton. But he never filled it. Stubborn as sin, claimed it clouded the ledger. Yesterday's event. Well, the post-mortem confirmed occlusion. No anomalies, no foreign agents. Pure coincidence, if one must call it that." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the dispensary shelf behind him, a glass-fronted cabinet stocked with vials of crystalline powders, and analysis was thorough. Tea leaves examined, stomach contents assayed. Nothing but a psalm and arrhythmia. If poison lurks, it's not in my pharmacopoeia. He paused, glancing at the door as if expecting eavesdroppers, then lowered his voice. "Though Evelyn frets, the will's unread, and Reggie's debts, whispered, mind, cast long shadows. But murder, in Buttercup Hollow, absurd as a peacock in the pulpit." She rose then, smoothing her skirt with quiet finality, the conversation a thread pulled but not yet snapped. "Absurdities often cloak the profound, doctor. Thank you for your time. And the shelves, for their silent testimony. As she departed the jam jar a small bribe for his candor, Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in his hand as he waved farewell. Coincidence. Indeed. Digitalis undispensed. Oleander shelved like a forbidden fruit. The circle tightened, motives overlapping like ivy on a crumbling wall. The evening brought respite in the form of the village fete, an annual frolic on the green, where St. Mary Mead donned its festive motley to banish the blues. Stalls bloomed like hothouse flowers under canvas awnings. Jam jars winking ruby and amber on trestle tables. Aunt Sally's clay pipe cocked in perpetual defiance. A coconut shy where mallets thwacked with gleeful inaccuracy, and the vicarage white elephant stall heaped with curiosities. A chipped spode teapot, a stuffed fox's head with glass eyes reproachful as a tax collector's. Brass bandsmen in pillbox hats tooted a medley of Gilbert and Sullivan, their notes competing with the sizzle of sausages on griddles and the laughter of children sticky with toffee apples. Lanterns strung on guy ropes began to glow as dusk encroached, casting a fairground warmth that gilded the gathering like a Renaissance tableau. Miss Marple, ever the participant rather than the spectator, had contributed a dozen pairs of her knitted booties to the tombola. Tiny blue and pink confections, soft as lamb's wool. And now wandered the fringes, her basket laden with a prize-winning marrow from Mrs. Ives's misplaced. "Miss Marple, fancy seeing you here. Win the brand tub, did you? Pa says it's rigged for the vicar, but I reckon it's the ghost of old Mrs. Hargrove pulling the strings." She smiled, offering a brandy snap from her bag, the crisp tube shattering sweetly between her fingers. "Ghosts meddle where the living hesitate, Thomas. Your father's bills weighed heavy this week, I imagine, the manor's shadow long as a winter evening. Yet you, the fleet-footed courier, saw more than envelopes that fateful afternoon, didn't you? A postboy's path winds through secrets like a fox through the undergrowth." Tommy flushed, the color blooming from his collar to his crown, and he shuffled his feet on the trampled grass, mallet twisting in his grip like a guilty conscience. "Miss, I swear on me bike chain, dropped the mail at the side gate, 3 on the dot, and scarpered like a hare with the hounds. Pa'd tan me if I dawdled. Bills don't deliver themselves." He paused, glancing over his shoulder at the shy, where a gaggle of girls shrieked as a coconut toppled. The fete's din provided cover, a babble of brass and banter, but his voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "But, I heard things. Slipped round the laurel hedge for a breather, lungs burnin' from the hill, and caught voices from the study window, open a crack for the breeze. The colonel snappin' at Grimshaw, sharp as a whip. 'Bitter brew, woman, your thievin' hand in the caddy?' She mumbles something, 'No, sir, just the leaves,' and scuttles off like a scalded cat. Then Bentley, laughin' low from the terrace, 'Pay up or rue it, Reggie. Old score settles sour.' Colonel barks back, 'Begone, Percy. Your debts died at the armistice.'" Miss Marple leaned closer, her spectacles glinting in the lantern light, the brandy snap forgotten in her hand. "And Evelyn. Whispers place her at the gate that hour." Tommy nodded, shuffling anew, his cap-brim shadowing eyes that darted like minnows. "Aye, she slipped in the side door, quiet as a shadow. Brooch glinted, deepened as she wended homeward. The green's lanterns bobbing like fireflies in her wake. The band striking up God Save the King with patriotic gusto. Lavender Lodge welcomed her with the glow of Cherry's lamps, the parlor a sanctuary of flickering candlelight where she settled by the table, her prize marrow set aside like a verdant sentinel. From her basket she retrieved the foxglove leaf, plucked days prior from Potts's border, its edges curling now like a miser's fist, and placed it under the parlor lamp, a hurricane globe of etched glass that cast prismatic shadows on the walls. The leaf, velvety and veined like a dragon's wing, held no anomaly under scrutiny. No crystalline residue, no unnatural wilt. Merely the innocent architecture of a plant that healed as readily as it harmed. Digitalis, she recalled from her herbal compendium. Strength for the faltering heart. Death in overdose, its bells tolling for both. Yet Thorn's tincture sat undrawn, the leaf pristine. The poison, if such it stalked the manor, hid not in petals but in a cup long scoured away, steeped in subtlety, masked by the mundane. Miss Marple extinguished the lamp with a soft click, the parlor plunging into twilight's embrace, and took up her knitting once more. Pearl, plain, the rhythm a mantra against the unraveling. The circle tightened, motives overlapped like ivy, choking the trunk of truth. Potts's grudge rooted deep, Larkins's debts branched wide. Grimshaw's tremor quivered at the core. Bentley's laugh echoed hollow. Evelyn's glint pierced the veil, and Thorn's shelves loomed like a dispensary of doubt. Threads, all, fraying at the edges, begging a weaver's hand. And Miss Marple, in the quiet of her cottage vigil, felt the pattern emerge. Not in the bloom, but in the blight beneath. Chapter 8. The Bitter Cup. Sunday dawned over St. Mary Mead with the serene indifference of a Sabbath untroubled by worldly haste. The sun ascending in a sky of unblemished azure, as if the heavens themselves conspired to polish the village to a gloss of pastoral parlors and potting sheds. Suspicions simmered, awaiting the spoon of scrutiny to stir them to boil. Miss Jane Marple, ever the sentinel of such subtle ferment, had devoted the morning to her devotions, not solely at the altar of St. Mary the Virgin, where she had knelt in her pew with the Book of Common Prayer open before her like a ledger of the soul, but in the more profane sanctuary of her commonplace book, its pages now dense with annotations in her precise copperplate. Wormwood, Bentley's tonic, Grimshaw's leaves, off. Evelyn's glint, pawned. Digitalis undrawn. The service had concluded with the vicar's tremulous sermon on the wages of sin, a theme that resonated with unintended irony. And as the congregation dispersed into the churchyard, Mrs. Ives clutching a posy of sweet peas, Major Bentley doffing his hat to the squire's widow, Miss Marple had slipped away, her sensible Oxfords whispering over the gravel paths like secrets shared among the yews. Reflection, she mused, was the Sabbath's true sacrament, and hers led her inexorably back to Hargrove Manor, where the bitter cup of truth waited to be drained. The manor house brooded under the midday sun, its limestone facade warmed to a honeyed glow, ivy tendrils climbing the walls like veins, pulsing with withheld confessions. The conservatory jutted eastward, its panes a mosaic of refracted light that danced across the lawns like mischievous sprites. And the rose gardens, Potts's domain, nodded in somnolent approval, their petals heavy with dew that sparkled like unspilled tears. Miss Marple approached via the servants' entrance, a discreet postern gate half concealed by a curtain of rambler roses. Her basket laden not with jam jars this time, but with a bottle of elderflower cordial, home brewed by Cherry, its label tied with a ribbon as innocent as a truce flag. Propriety, after all, armored even the boldest inquiry. One did not storm bastions with bare suspicion, but with the honeyed lure of civility. Mrs. Agatha Grimshaw answered her discreet rap with Evelyn's sheet music and correspondence, and a low table bearing a vase of fresh delphiniums, their spikes a defiant azure against the room's muted tones. Grimshaw poured the cordial into cut-glass tumblers with hands steadier than on their last encounter, the liquid fizzing faintly like suppressed effervescence, and settled opposite her guest on a horsehair settee that prickled through their skirts like a penance. "To what do I owe this Sabbath intrusion, ma'am? The inquest's dust scarce settled, and here you are, unraveling it anew. Speak plain. The manor's grown weary of whispers." Miss Marple sipped the cordial, its floral tartness a balm to the throat, and met the housekeeper's gaze with the unflinching mildness of one who has weathered many a storm. "Whispers are the wind before the gale, Mrs. Grimshaw. Necessary, but fleeting. Your loyalty to this house is the manor's true foundation. Yet foundations crack under concealed weights. The missing fiver. A trifle, perhaps, but trifles topple towers. Did the colonel relent? Or did shadows linger in the ledgers?" Grimshaw's tumbler paused midway to her lips, the glass catching a prism of light that fractured across her knuckles, swollen from years of wielding the smoothing iron. She set it down with deliberate care, her voice emerging low and laced with the raw edge of confession, like bread dough punched down to rise anew. "Shadows. Aye. They clung like soot to a chimney. The fiver wasn't theft, Miss Marple. Never that. Loans to Miss Evelyn. Slipped to her reticule last Easter, when the dressmaker's bill came due and the colonel was roaring about frivolities. She wept, poor lamb. Aunt Clara's pearls pawned, Grimshaw. Uncle'll disinherit me for a bauble. I couldn't see her cast adrift. 30 years in this house, and she's the last bloom of it. Hid the shortfall in the grocer's tally. Petty, I know, but mercy's a sin when the ledger's law. The colonel discovered it Thursday morn before his tea. That note you glimpsed? His gauntlet thrown. But poison? Departed with a murmured blessing. The cordial bottle lighter, but her basket heavier, with the weight of concealed kindness. The Hollow's paths led her next to the potting shed, where Silas Potts labored under the afternoon's languor, his secateurs snipping at errant suckers on a climbing new dawn, with the absent rhythm of one whose mind wandered pastures greener than his plots. He accepted her second offering, a twist of Cherry's oatmeal biscuits, wrapped in waxed paper, with a grunt that passed for gratitude, wiping soil from his palms on a rag as threadbare as his patience. "Miss Marple," he rumbled, leaning on his rake like a scepter of reluctant sovereignty. "Sabbaths for sermons, not soil. But fire away. Your questions stick like burrs." His bramble mustache twitched, eyes sharp under hedgerow brows. But the fight had ebbed from him, leaving a weariness as deep-rooted as his grudge. She proffered a biscuit, its crumbs scattering like fallen petals. "Sermons preach forgiveness, Mr. Potts. Gardens practice it, pruning the past to foster the future. Your shears bit deep this week. Not at aphids, I suspect, but at rivals' roses. The Fet's whispers paint a picture of tampered blooms." Potts chewed slowly, the oat flecking his whiskers like frost on bracken, and his laugh emerged as a bark, hollow as a rotted stump. "Tampered? Guilty as charged, ma'am, but not the colonel's patch. Old Biddle from the vicarage, that pompous prig with his lady-gay hybrid, dosed his roots with saltpeter night afore the show. Watched him wilt like a spinster's hopes. Petty, aye, but the blue ribbon was mine by right. Hargrove docked me for less than that. Grudge? A thorn in the thumb, not the heart. My alibi's the shed logs, witnessed by the rain barrels drip till dusk." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze sweeping the shed's clutter. Jars of bone meal and bloodfish, a ledger of plantings dog-eared at the oleander page. Thorns prick, but hearts endure. The conservatory's exotics, their scents wander, do they not? Unbalanced. Miss Marple, Sabbath suds suit you. Cider on the house? Pa's treat for the pie wisdom. His laugh graveled the air, but his fingers drummed the bar, a morse of unease. She accepted a half-pint, the cider's bite sharp as regret. Wisdom's a shared vintage, Mr. Larkins. Your yard thrives, yet fears of bankruptcy whisper louder than hammers. The manor's dead. Does it hang like a noose, or has time loosened the knot? Larkins drained his tankard, signaling for a refill with a raised finger that trembled faintly. Noose? Aye, it chokes like one. 300 quid now halved by the will's hints, but the bank's breathin' down my neck like a bailiff in boots. Tommy's post wages scarce cover the flour. One more lean month and it's the workhouse for the lot. Called on Reggie that day to plead, not threaten. Door slammed. But I slunk to the bore, witnesses galore. Wilkins, Hargreaves, even the barmaid's cat rubbin' my ankles. Alibi's ironclad, ma'am. Bluster's my bark, not my bite. Miss Marple sipped, her eyes twinkling over the rim. Barks echo, but bites leave marks. The tea tray, your son's glimpse of Grimshaw's fuss. A dropped pot, perhaps, spilling more than leaves. He shook his head, whiskers quivering. Tommy's tale, nervous hands, aye, but no spill. Just the tray wobblin' like a drunk on ice. Bitter brew, she muttered. Colonel refused the sugar. If poison's the pie, it's not from my oven. Dusk painted the hollow in lavender hues as Miss Marple's pilgrimage concluded at the manor once more. This time in the drawing room, where Evelyn Thorne received her with tear-bright eyes and a brooch absent from her lapel. A void as telling as a missing puzzle piece. The girl poured sherry from a cut crystal decanter, her auburn curls disheveled as if ruffled by inner tempests, and perched on the chintz sofa like a bird on a precarious perch. Miss Marple, she breathed, pressing a handkerchief to lips that thrice refused. Hargrove's sweet tooth, a village legend, yet thrice denied in rage's heat. The residue green, not tannin, but verdant sap. Wormwood's bitterness a mask, not the toxin but the veil. Oleander, from the conservatory's hidden shelf, odorless and steep, mimicking the heart's falter. Gathered by a hand gloved against thorns. Bentley's tonic flask, his low laugh, the exposed sharping. Revenge steeped slow. The IOU burned as blind. The cup sweetened by his own measure. Knowing the habit, fleeing when Grimshaw returned. The threads unraveled, false leads falling like overripe petals. Grimshaw's loans a mercy, Potts's salt a prank. Larkins's fear a fog, Evelyn's pawn a plea. Thorne's shelves innocent. The bitter cup clarified. Oleander's thorn pricked clear. Bentley's wings singed in the flame of old betrayal. The circle closed. The hollow's peace, fragile as a Sabbath vow, awaited dawn's revelation. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. Twilight descended upon Buttercup Hollow with the gentle inevitability of a curtain falling on a well-rehearsed drama. The sun's last rays bleeding into the western sky, like spilled ink across a vellum map. It was the evening of that fateful Sunday, the 6th of July, and the hollow, once a cradle of untroubled repose, now seemed to hold its breath, the ancient oaks casting elongated shadows that clawed at the meadows like fingers groping for purchase in the gathering gloom. The buttercups, those golden harbingers of summer's idyll, had folded their petals against the encroaching chill, leaving the dell to the dominion of crickets' chirps and the distant, mournful hoot of an owl stirring in the yews. Hargrove Manor, that ivy-clad sentinel at the hollow's heart, loomed larger in the half-light, its mullioned windows aglow with the wavering flicker of beeswax candles, as if the house itself anticipated the storm of truths about to break within its walls. In the breeze, responses had trickled back via the postboy's satchel or the grapevine of garden fences, acceptances laced with curiosity, a few with the wary edge of the cornered. By 6:30, the drawing room, a spacious chamber of Georgian elegance with walls paneled in honeyed oak and a plaster ceiling molded in acanthus leaves, hummed with the subdued tension of an overwound clock. The long-case timepiece in the corner ticked with ponderous insistence, its brass pendulum swinging like a scythe marking the inexorable march toward revelation. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, apple logs snapping with restrained fury, casting dancing shadows across the turkey carpet and the chintz-upholstered sofas grouped in a semicircle before it. Crystal decanters on a Sheraton sideboard gleamed with amber promise, sherry for the gentlemen, cordial for the ladies, and a silver tray bore Mrs. Grimshaw's handiwork, seed cake sliced to gossamer thinness, butter curls shaped like roses, and a pot of Darjeeling steaming gently, its aroma a fragile counterpoint to the undercurrent of unease. Candelabra on the mantel flanked a portrait of the late Mrs. Clara Hargrove, her serene smile in oils a silent witness, her eyes seeming to follow the assembly with maternal forbearance. The guests arrived in a staggered procession, each entry a vignette of character etched against the twilight beyond the French doors. First came Evelyn Thorne, gliding in like a willow in the wind, her dove-gray frock whispering against the parquet floor, auburn curls pinned with a simplicity that belied the turmoil in her storm-cloud eyes. She clutched a lace handkerchief, twisting it like a lifeline, and sank onto the sofa's edge with a murmur of greeting that carried the faint tremor of one who has wept in private. Miss Marple, this summons, so cryptic, the manor's shadows grow long. I pray your light scatters them. Next lumbered Harold Larkins, his broad frame filling the doorway like a cork in a bottle, tweed jacket straining at the seams, and boots polished to a gait. But duty calls louder than dustpans. Sherry? Nay, cordial for me, keeps the head clear. She perched on a wing chair, posture ramrod, the very embodiment of loyalty armored against betrayal. Silas Potts arrived with the scent of turned earth clinging to his corduroys, secateurs tucked absently into his belt like a gardener's talisman, his bramble mustache dusted with pollen from a late afternoon prune. He grunted a salutation, accepting a glass with calloused fingers that dwarfed the stem, and lowered himself onto a pouf with a creak of protesting joints. Miss Marple, your notes chase a man like aphids. Sabbaths for rest, not riddles. If it's the roses you're after, they've bloomed true. No wilt in my watch. His voice rumbled like distant thunder, eyes sharp under hedgerow brows, scanning the room as if appraising a rival plot. Dr. Elias Thorne entered with professional poise, his Harris tweed suit impeccable, wire-rimmed spectacles glinting like beacons of reason. He bowed to the assembly with a nod to each, Evelyn's hand squeezed briefly in fraternal reassurance, and chose a straight-backed chair near the fire. sherry in hand like a prop for contemplation. Fascinating company, Miss Marple, though I confess your invitation piqued my curiosity more than a rare malady. The inquest's ink scarce dry. What fresh prescription do you offer for our collective malaise? Last came Major Percival Bentley, limping in on his cane with the clipped stride of a parade ground veteran, his drill suit crisp despite the evening's damp, monocle dangling like a medal of dubious valor. He surveyed the gathering with a hawkish sweep, mustache bristling as he claimed the armchair by the sideboard, pouring his sherry with a flourish that sloshed a ruby droplet onto the cloth. By Jove, a regular salon. Reggie'd turn in his, well, wherever he's bound. Your billet-doux arrived mid-pipe, madam. Couldn't resist the intrigue. Fire away. A soldier's ear is ever cocked for the bugle call. Miss Marple perched on the central sofa like a queen on her throne of weight of unassailable certainty. We gather not in grief's cold clasp, nor in the hollow formality of an inquest's echo, but in pursuit of clarity, a light to banish the fog that has shrouded Buttercup Hollow these shadowed days. You are the manor's constellation, niece and heir, housekeeper and heart, gardener and guardian, builder and burden-bearer, healer and historian, soldier and score-settler. Each of you orbits the tragedy at our center, Colonel Reginald Hargrove's passing, and each, in turn, has cast a ray upon it, illuminating paths that twist like the hollow's lanes. Yet one path veers not toward nature's gentle hand, but toward artifice's crueler stroke. The colonel did not succumb to the whim of a faltering heart, but to a poisoner's calculated draught. Oleander, that deceptively fair bloom of the conservatory, steeped insidious in his afternoon tea, coaxing the organ to stillness as surely as a bayonet stills a foe. A gasp rippled through the room like wind through wheat, Evelyn's handkerchief fluttering to her lap, Grimshaw's tumbler clinking against the saucer, Potts's secateurs slipping to the carpet with a muffled thud. Larkins choked on his sherry, coughing into his kerchief with the force of a man strangling on revelation, while Thorne's spectacles slipped down his nose, caught just in time by ink-stained fingers. Bentley's monocle dropped to his lapel with a ping, his face draining to the pallor of old campaign maps. And even Paulk shifted by the door, his notebook unfolding like a fan of readiness. The fire crackled louder in the stunned hush, shadows leaping across the portrait as if Clara Hargrove herself recoiled from the unfolding tableau. Preposterous! Bentley blustered at last, rising half from his chair with cane rapping the floor like a prosecutor's gavel, his mustache quivering as if lashed by a gale. Oleander. Poison? This is some village melodrama, madam. Reggie's ticker gave out, plain as the nose on your face. The doctor's word, the coroner's seal. The clock's tick now a heartbeat in the void. Thorne leaned forward, spectacles readjusted, his voice a scalpel's edge. Miss Marple, the post-mortem. Overlooked, she interjected mildly, as post-mortems often do when the cup is washed and the leaves discarded. But trifles endure. The greenish residue on the saucer, thrice refused sugar from a man whose sweet tooth was the village's jest, the conservatory door's untimely yawn. You visited not for debts, Major Bentley, but for reckoning. An old score from the Buff's mess, where Reggie exposed your card-sharping sleight, whispering to the colonel of your marked decks and false flushes. It cost you stripes, nearly the commission, a ruination whispered from Singapore to Whitehall. The IOU you brandished? A blind, burned in your club's hearth that very afternoon, forgiven in ink but not in ire. You sweetened the tea yourself, knowing his ritual, 2 lumps to lure the sip, then fled when Grimshaw returned with her tray, the wormwood masking the oleander's trace until the heart faltered mid-ledger. Bentley's cane clattered to the floor, his frame sagging back into the armchair like a puppet with severed strings, the monocle forgotten on his lap. His eyes, pale gray and wild now, darted to each face, Evelyn's horror, Grimshaw's flinty disdain, Potts's slow nod of grim accord, before settling on Miss Marple with the hollow defeat of a routed general. The fire's glow hollowed his cheeks, etching lines deeper than Singapore scars. And when he spoke, his voice emerged not as bluster, but as the rasp of a man unburdened at last. He deserved it. The blackguard ruined me. Percy, your hands are quicker than your honor. He sneered in the antechamber, ink still wet on the report that stripped my pips. 20 years' service, medals pinned like fool's gold, all for a deck of painted lies. The plantations failed, the pension trickled like sand. Reggie, with his acres and his Assam, laughed from his throne. Oleander, murder of Colonel Reginald Hargrove. Willful poisoning, contrary to the king's peace. Anything you say may be noted. Best save it for the magistrate. His voice, usually a yokel's drawl, carried the steel of duty, and he clapped the irons with efficient clicks, Bentley's wrists yielding without resistance, the monocle slipping to the floor like a discarded honor. As Polk led the major toward the door, his limp now a shuffle of surrender, the cane dragged like a traitor's banner, the room seemed to expand once more, the fire settling to a contented purr, the clock chiming the half-hour with oblivious cheer. Miss Marple rose slowly, her vial replaced in the basket, and gestured to the tray with a smile as serene as a summer dawn. Ruination begets ruin, Major. But mercy might have mended it. A word in the vicar's ear, a hand extended over old ledgers. Yet the past, like oleander's sap, stains indelible. Now, my dears, tea, I think. Properly brewed, with sugar to sweeten the bitter. The hollow heals with time, and dawn brings buttercups anew. The assembly stirred then, like actors dispersing after the curtains fall. Evelyn rising to embrace Grimshaw in a tearful clasp, the housekeeper's starch melting to a rare sob. Potts retrieving his secateurs with a grunt of vindication, offering Larkins a rough clap on the shoulder. "Your debts'll wait, mate. The manor's soil's rich enough for 2. Thorne murmuring of posthumous assays to Polk, his spectacles fogged with relief. The French doors stood ajar to the night, stars pricking the velvet sky like stitches mending the tear. And, as the constable's lantern bobbed down the drive, Bentley's silhouette a diminished shadow in its wake. The drawing room filled with the soft clink of porcelain, the murmur of voices knitting back to normalcy. Buttercup Hollow's storm had broken. Its thunder rolled to distant cells, leaving the village to its cozy vigil. Tea steaming, truths unveiled. Particular seemed to exhale a collective breath of renewal, its cottages basking in the warmth, their casements flung wide to admit the day's promise. Its oaks arching protectively over the lanes, their leaves rustling in soft approbation, and its namesake blooms nodding in golden clusters, as if the dell itself had decided to reclaim its cheerful moniker from the shadows of sorrow. Lavender Lodge, That snug bastion of borrowed tranquility at the hollow's lip, stood as a microcosm of this resurgence. The cottage, with its walls of sun-warmed stone and its thatched roof sloping like a benevolent brow, had become more than a seasonal retreat for Miss Jane Marple. It was a sanctuary woven from the threads of routine and revelation, where the clamor of the manor's tragedy had been transmuted into the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle neatly boxed. The morning light streamed through the parlor's lace curtains, etching filigree patterns on the turkey rug and illuminating the motes of dust that danced like contented sprites in the sunbeams. The room itself was a testament to unhurried grace. Walls papered in faded willow patterns, shelves bowed under the weight of well-thumbed volumes, Miss Austen's Emma cheek by jowl with Beeton's Household Management, and the mantel adorned with a vase of fresh buttercups, their petals a defiant splash of gold against the polished oak. The hearth, though unlit in the season's warmth, bore the faint patina of last winter's fires, a reminder that even in summer's embrace the chill of human folly could linger. Miss Marple sat in her wing chair by the window, a throne of rose damask worn soft as a confidant's shoulder. Her silver hair coiled in its customary chignon beneath a lace cap embroidered with violets. At 70-something, precisely how many somethings remained her private arithmetic, she moved with the unhurried poise of one who had long ago mastered the art of waiting, for stitches to set, for tea to steep, for truths to surface like cream in the jug. Her hands gloved in dove-gray kid to spare the fervor of a maestro at rehearsal. That sturdy sentinel of domesticity, with her arms like a blacksmith's bellows and her heart as expansive as a suet pudding, had outdone herself. The teapot, a floral spode heirloom, steamed with a somme as robust as the Colonel's former brew, minus, of course, any suspect infusions. Scones, fresh from the oven, perched golden and puffed on a tiered stand, their tops glistening with a glaze of Demerara sugar. Clotted cream heaped in a silver bowl like Devonshire snowdrifts, and strawberry preserve from Mrs. Ives's June harvest, its ruby hue winking like a conspirator's wink. Cherry bustled in with the laden tray, her mob cap askew and cheeks flushed from the range's heat, setting it down on the low table with a flourish that rattled the spoons like castanets. "There now, ma'am, fit for a duchess, or at least a detective. The scones are light as a curate's conscience, and the jam's so tart it'll pucker a lemon. Your callers'll be here any tick. Young Tommy Larkins near ran me off the lane on his bike, hollerin', 'Miss Marple's teased the talk.' Best part of the week, that. Folks smilin' again. Debts forgotten like yesterday's rain." Cherry's voice was a warm rumble, laced with the burr of Somerset orchards, and she straightened a doily with maternal pride before retreating to the kitchen, her apron strings trailing like victory banners. Miss Marple smiled faintly, adjusting the shawl across her lap, and poured the first cup with the precision of a chemist titrating her truths. The door's latch clicked moments later, admitting the first of her guests in a flutter of skirts and sympathetic sighs. Mrs. Arabella Ives swept in like a galleon under full sail, her floral print gown a riot of poppies and peonies that clashed gloriously with the parlor's willows, her cheeks rosy as ripening apples and her arms laden with a basket of speckled eggs. "Fresh from the hens, Jane dear. Daisy's gone broody again, laying doubles as if to atone for the fuss." The widow's laughter, once by cards and once by conscience. "But mark me, The fet's tomorrow's bomb. Potts swears his rhododendrons'll sweep the blues, and Larkins's marrows are swollen as his relief. The manor's debts? Wiped cleaner than a curate's slate. Evelyn's codicil saw to that. And Grimshaw? Well, you'll see. The woman's thawed like butter on a hot scone. As if summoned by the invocation, the latch lifted once more, admitting Evelyn Thorne with the tentative grace of a fawn testing frozen ground. The colonel's niece had shed the dove-gray of mourning for a sprigged muslin in soft primrose, its bodice fitted with pearl buttons that caught the light like dewdrops on petals, and her auburn curls, freed from their tortoiseshell comb, framed a face that bore the lighter pallor of one who has slept without specters. The emerald brooch was absent, no longer pawned, but redeemed from the pawnbroker's dusty case with the manor's first liberated funds, and in its stead, a simple locket dangled at her throat, engraved with CH, in remembrance. She carried a posy of the Hollow's buttercups, tied with satin ribbon, and her steps, though still shadowed by loss, moved with a steadiness that spoke of anchors resecured. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Ives," Evelyn said, her voice a melody untroubled by minor keys, as she placed the posy on the mantel beside Clara's vase, the golds mingling like old allies. "Your invitation was a lifeline amid the ledgers. The solicitor's offices are a fog of foolscap, but the manor's mine now, debts dissolved like mist at noon. Uncle's codicil, mercy in ink, forgiving what wrath denied in life." She sank onto the sofa's plump cushions, accepting a scone slathered with cream and jam from Miss Marple's hand, her first bite eliciting a sigh of unfeigned delight. The Hollow blooms anew. Potts's roses triumphant at the fete, no doubt, and Larkins's repairs underway at last. Even the conservatory. I've asked him to uproot the oleander. No more bitter cups there. Sachets. "Ma'am," Grimshaw began, her agate eyes flicking to the tray with the wariness of a cat eyeing cream. "Your note found me at the linen press. 30 years folds, and still they wrinkle. But the manor's quiet now, like a house after a high wind. Thought I'd venture out, see if the Hollow's air still bites." She accepted the proffered chair with a nod that bordered on a curtsy, and when Miss Marple pressed a cup into her hands, strong, with 2 lumps precisely measured, her lips twitched in what, on closer inspection, proved a genuine smile, faint as a crescent moon but warming as the tea itself. "Sugar, eh? The colonel's vice, and mine now, it seems. No more bitters for this tongue." The 4 women formed a cozy tableau then, skirts whispering against the rug as they leaned in over the table, the sunlight slanting through the window to gild their faces like a benediction. Cherry peeked from the kitchen door, tray balanced for a second round, her grin broad as the Medway, before withdrawing to let the conversation unfold. Miss Marple observed them with the quiet satisfaction of a gardener, surveying her plot after rain. Evelyn, lighter of heart with the manor secured and debts forgiven like autumn leaves to the wind. Mrs. Ives, beaming like a lighthouse in fog, her basket of eggs a cornucopia of village vitality. Grimshaw, allowing that rare smile over her cup, the starch of her apron traded for the softness of shared sips. The Hollow healed, as villages invariably did, scars fading to stories, suspicions to supper-table jests. "The village mends its fences," Miss Marple observed, buttering a scone with the precision of a diplomat sealing a pact, her voice a gentle underscore to the room's warmth. Bentley's folly, a stark reminder that old wounds, if left to fester without poultice, bloom into thorns sharper than any rose. Yet see how the hollow rights itself. Potts's gardens flourish unpruned by temper. Lark clarity, and leaned back, her gaze drifting to the buttercups on the mantel, their simple heads nodding in perpetual affirmation. Sorcery, my dear, nay, merely the commonplace, observed with patience. People, you see, are much like these buttercups outside. Simple on the surface, cheerful as a child's primer, but with roots that delve deep into the soil of motive, twisting toward light or shadow as their nature dictates. The colonel's passing puzzled at first, a heart so stout, felled mid-ledger. Yet the trifles whispered, the teacup's rim, smeared not with tannin but a verdant residue, like oleander's sap kissed by conservatory dew. The sugar bowl, thrice refused by a man whose sweet tooth was the guild's standing jest. 2 lumps and a grunt, as Mrs. Ives so aptly mimics. Bitter they called it, Wormwood's whiff, Bentley's tonic masking the draught, but not the deed. And the glint, ah, that monocle, catching the sun through the French doors as he lingered too long at the threshold, gloves discarded on the terrace bench like a surgeon's shed skin. Potts glimpsed the door's yawn, Tommy the low laugh of old scores, Grimshaw the tremor of a hand not her own pouring the fatal steep. Red herrings abounded, the foxglove's bells tolling false for digitalis, Evelyn's brooch a pawned plea for mercy, your loan's a housekeeper's hidden kindness, Lawkins's debt's a builder's bluster veiling fear. Yet the roots converged. Bentley's grudge from the buff's mess, a sharping exposed that stripped his stripes, revenge steeped slow in the manor's own exotics. Oleander, Clara's jasmine's wicked cousin, odorless, insidious, mimicking the heart's falter till the blue tide rose. Everyday observations, my dears, a door ajar, a cup refused, a glint in the light. Woven true they form the tapestry, no sorcery, but the steady eye of one who knows that human nature, like a garden, betrays its secrets in the fallen leaf. Softly behind them, leaving Miss Marple alone in the sun-dappled hush. Her shawl resumed, and needles clicking once more. Buttercup Hollow settled into its peace, a cozy testament to wit's triumph over wickedness, where thorns yielded to blooms, and the bitter cup, drained at last, gave way to tea sweet as resolution.